So friends, this image came into my purview after speaking with indie filmmaker Jordan Brown. And he said to me, this reminds me of where we will end up one day if we keep going the way we're going. It's an image that was created by Erin Fowler, a Canadian artist, and Terry Bookman, the managing editor of the IEEE Technology and Society magazine, actually tracked down Erin and asked if we could pay for this image as a front cover to IEEE Technology and Society magazine for one of the specials we were running on wearables and the future. And I guess this is my response to movement 3. If we keep going on the same trajectory in our future of work, is this how we will end up? In a derelict home where we stop being aware of our surroundings, even of our own selves, the ability to take care of ourselves, take care of our homes, take care of our environment outside, take care of our community, and be zonked out on these goggles and plugged in, as you can see there on the PowerPoint, as if we require a drip to an electricity feed. My feeling is at the moment that a great deal of society is feeling somewhat unable to come to terms with the speed of change, even though we're quite adaptive as human beings. And in this mind-body connection that has ruptured there, you can see the link being ruptured. We can see that this has a huge fallout on society at large. There's this disconnect between the mind and the heart, or the mind and the body, the fact that we are embodied beings in flesh, with muscles, with blood vessels, with the requirement to have movement, that we can't be stagnant and sedentary on a chair all day, but also the fact that our lack of movement is causing us to have mental health side effects. And so this notion of something having ruptured in society at large. And at times we are resembling these kinds of cables and wires on poles, this intricate webbing and weaving and requirement for cables and wires. I mean, any one of us travel with our laptops, our mobile phones, we always have chargers with us, we have PowerPoints, we have data banks and power banks, and we have external hard drives, not to mention earphones and a whole bunch of other sort of kits that follow us wherever we go. But we're trying to not be entangled in this vastness of technology bits and pieces, but often we are, and we get very frustrated when we forget one of these pieces. And that's us. You know, perhaps we're not all lusting for high tech, but we are on overload, and we don't have one of those no overload switches which stops the short circuiting, and as a result we are short circuiting. It is too much. Christine Paraxis calls this allostatic overload, and I think she's right that once we overload our senses with sensors or sensor-rich information that's coming at us in a data-driven way or a recommender way, then we are unable to function as members of society, and also unable to do good or positive change, or think clearly or with clarity to support one another in a care relationship. And so many of us come face to face with this particular scenario where we have given birth to children and offspring, and we are either preoccupied with our devices at a time that we should be giving our full attention, but there is an attention deficit, and the virtual somehow interrupts that physical space whereby we should be communicating with one another face to face and making eye contact, and yet we are either taking photographs of our food or photographs of a scene rather than living the scene or being in the moment. It's a fairly complex thing, as our attention is being vied for from various vectors, but the most important people are those who are in front of us in our own household. And so where might we be divesting time to? It may well be smartphones. We know we should be disconnecting more often. The three locations are the bedroom, the kitchen and the vehicle, and yet these are the times that we find ourselves with some downtime and responsive. If you've ever seen anyone lose their computer or misplace their handset, you can see the complexity of them trying to regather their footsteps to locate their devices. Today's devices carry everything on there, from work, which is of a sensitive nature and a timeliness nature, to processes that are deeply embedded via connectivity on different kinds of devices, to companion devices like smartphones that have onboard, phone books and address books and photography dating a decade in some cases of some people. Also social media linkages, passwords and so much more, internet banking, vehicles to different kinds of services. So misplacing these devices can be disruptive, but also that we feel that we can spend more time with our technologies than we do with human beings or nature around us. And so this amazing quote that actually came from an interview with Metropolitan Callistus Ware, formerly of Oxford University and Pembroke College, was, "We love our computers, but they do not love us and never will." And that's a very frank response by Yerunda Callistus Ware, who noted that our devices can't love. So we're spontaneous beings, that's how I see it. We can actually change our minds, we can inflect and drive change, we can do things like surprise, and a lot of people will say, well, AI can do the same, but no, I believe microchips are simply random generators, and even when we look at unexplainable things that happen with AI, and you can call that spontaneous, it's spontaneous in a different way, not in a human ingested, human informed way. And so I make the point that machines don't dream. They can't dream. That machines can't pray. It's impossible for them to have that awareness. They also can't thirst, and the minute something can't thirst, it can't really comprehend the human plight. When we talk about human rights and we talk about empathy and we talk about compassion, these can't be felt by machines, no matter how much we build affective computing into technologies. I'm talking about something very different here. And so when we're thinking about the future of work, again, what kind of empathic intelligence can we incorporate into the future of work that acknowledges that humans have limitations and they have needs that are different to machines? Even when we're working in this human-robot teaming scenario, which I think will become prevalent, and so it should in some cases, where some of the grunt work can be taken away from human workers to allow for less dangerous work and work that won't have long-term physical effects. And machines don't know what it's like to be homeless. You can put a box outside a window or a box outside the strong room, and sure, it can be, dismantled, but it doesn't know it's being dismantled. Humans, however, have this feeling of need and of loss and of heartache in their circumstances, holistic or otherwise. And so I point back to this wonderful book, a short book by C.S. Lewis in 1943 on the abolition of man. And I think that's a book that we need to return to. He talks about the slumber of cold vulgarity, and he spoke about that in 1943, of course, given what was happening at the time. And in that hideous strength, he does talk about a head that would finally self-destruct, and that man would be reduced to something like a head, with perhaps automated extensions. And that's what's what's basically ruptured, this connection between the head and the heart, or the connection between the head and the embodiment of the rest of the sarx, the human body. And so once we're reduced to just a thinking machine, then hideous things can actually take place. And so I emphasize that what I would like humans to think about in terms of the future of work is to be human, is to live as a human, not to live like a machine. And how can we do that when we have these discrete devices that are not analog like we are? Our brain, when we look at the amplitude, is analog, so is our heart. And yet the computing devices are discrete, and there is a mismatch. Here I call it something almost akin to trying to link two separate tables in computing into the same database. And one table has a primary key that is alphanumeric, while the other table has a primary key that is just numeric. And so once you try to do a join between those primary keys, it can't happen. And we've got to be cognizant of that we are human, that we breathe, that we have needs. And how do we reinforce this humanness rather than trying to replace it with devices like Neuralink or other brain implantable devices to become more like the machines? Now, this is an ideological position. There are imperatives linked with this kind of context, but the question is, where will man and where will women and where will others be most productive? Not in the technological sense, but in the human value sense. And I think it has a lot to do with values. And I want to place emphasis on things like skin-to-skin contact, where there is consent, where we are able to create attachments and bonds of two humans coming together, of two or more humans forming friendships. And that is what to me is important in the societal context, is this bigger endeavor, which is to strengthen society at local levels, to do better coordination. And that only happens when there is contact between people. Sure, we're living at a time during the requirement of physical distancing due to the COVID pandemic, but otherwise, what is the best way to mobilize? What is the best way to feel satisfied as a human? What is the best way to engage in the mystery of kindness and friendship and togetherness? It is by being together. And I also want to acknowledge that I am human. I can't do things that machines can do, and that's okay. We're introducing new technologies that we are conceiving through social imaginaries like drones, and they have this amazing capacity to do things that humans can't, and to go to places where humans cannot, especially dangerous locations. But I am very comfortable with the fact that if I cut myself, I'm going to bleed, and that I have needs as a result. It means that I can not remove risk entirely, but be aware of my limitations in what is possible. And sure, I could go without sleep for 1 night and 2 nights and 3 nights, but after 4 nights and 5 nights, it's going to catch up on you. I can do the same with food, but again, it catches up on you. So our limitations are actually there to support us, not to be our enemy, and that we have to become more aware of these and create structures in the workplace that actually respect these limits, not pushing us beyond what is possible. And of course, the bane of email, or the bane of interacting on Zoom, or the bane of whatever it is, a workflow that requires some pushing of flags to get to the next stage, is something that I'm well aware of as an academic and a professional worker in the past. And finally, this last image, I think reinstates where I'm coming from in my whole design studio process, whereby I'm looking at the fact that we all need each other. It's an interdependent, interlocking, interweaving of people and difference and diversity and age and ethnicity and religious beliefs and positions on political parties and coordination efforts. We all need this difference, but in fact, at the end, what we all perhaps desire most is that there is a hand to reach out to at the end of the day when we go home, or when we go to the office, or we find ourselves in a public space. And this potentially increases in requirement when we are approaching an older age. whereby at age 50 you begin to think about your mortality more often. It happens almost effortlessly. And at age 60 you realize, well, mortality could be around the corner. But for many nation states that are not as developed in terms of resources or in terms of coordination or even technology, mortality can happen at a much younger age, particularly for those countries where there is a huge proportion of infant mortality. Despite that those numbers are going down, which is good to see, we still can't probably come to terms with the number of children who are dying daily as a result of not having access to clean drinking water or basic food or basic medical attention. So in this last slide, I mean, what's this got to do with the future of work? Well, everything. We don't want to be distancing from one another. We also want to respect each other's space, of course, but this is alluding to the fact that humans need each other. They don't necessarily require machines to prosper, but how can we access technology and utilize it for all that it can give us without forgetting that it is people who are next to us that are actually the ones that we are acting in a particular way for. It's not for machines, but for the longevity and the prosperity of human beings. So with those thoughts, I hope you enjoyed the studio, the Design Lab studio, and I'm hoping that some of these reflections will be useful to you and your families and your workplaces. Thank you. This is Katina Michael from Arizona State University.